All right. Good morning. This is the Friday, June 3rd meeting of JupyterLab. Take it away.
All right, so lots of updates this week. I guess, Darian, do you want to give a short update, and then I'll give a short update from the point of Steve and me, and then we'll hit this discussion about installation.
Okay. So as of last week, I had pushed all the console changes I thought likely to get in, and that big merge that Steve and Jason needed to do was sort of dependent on. So I just stopped and had that go into master, and then let you guys have at it over the next 4 days. And then when I came back to it, it was at a point where a few of you guys had all begun using the console and had some actual feedback, which is great. So basically, all the weird behaviors that could be caught in a just once over have been caught, I think. And so this week it was mostly just cleaning up some of the things that changed a bit when you guys did your refactor, and just cleaning up whatever issues were outstanding for completion functionality. And so now the completion widget works fine in the notebook and in the console, which honestly I was hoping would happen this quickly, but I wasn't sure it would. I tried to write this thing in an agnostic way so that it would work on both, but I actually was a little more pessimistic than I needed to be. It's there now, so that's great. That's really good. And that's really all I have to report this week. But I think that Jason and Steve did a ton of stuff that managed to go in really, really cleanly, and that's really great. But you guys will, Jason will have to describe what actually happened there. So that's it for me.
I want to say, Darian, this looks great. I didn't realize the console had been merged. I just found it via the commands menu. The commands. What are we calling that? The commands thing.
Command palette.
Commands.
Command palette.
The command palette. And it looks great. I mean, just on first blush, I think it's exactly in the right direction. We can fine tune as we go, but awesome. I think this is exactly what we wanted. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. Just don't type the help command.
or input or a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, basically anything that would have been interactive inside the console, like things like putting a password or things like that, they're gonna make your kernel pause, basically, hoping for you to give input, but the console currently doesn't have a way of you putting in that input, so your kernel freezes.
Yeah. No, we had the notebook. The notebook was missing that for a while, and it took a while to get that feature in. I mean, it's super important capability, obviously, that we want, but I understand why it's not there on day one, because it takes extra work to wire because that's a different channel. It's a different WebSocket channel. So no, right. We lived without it on the notebook for a while. It's okay if it's not there on day one. So this is great.
Cool.
So Steve and I worked a lot on the notebook. Steve wrote a massive amount of code. I was reviewing it. We merged it in. Essentially, we rewrote the architecture for handling documents and hooking those up to kernels, and it's in now. And then building on, and we also in that included architecture for notebook extensions. So plugins that modify notebook behavior, and as part of that, I pushed in a version of the functionality. So basic widgets work now in the notebook. Brought up a lot of.
I just saw the in-slider email example.
Yep. So
great.
So we're getting there as far as basic functioning notebook. I think at this point it would be good to get some early beta testing from you and Brian and Cameron, et cetera, and some of these first pass issues, and as well as UI issues. So to that end, we released Jupyter server extension, so it works in Notebook 4.2, but it also works in master. So it's a server extension that basically takes what was the hard-coded version in the notebook and makes it available,
So I
that
will give you this in terms of not me. Hello. Okay. In terms of having a good benchmark for a harder case for interactivity, I think getting PyLab Notebook Plot 123 to work is a good one, because that's a more complex piece of machinery, right? The notebook backend of Matplotlib, not the inline backend.
Right. Okay. So this actually brings up a lot of questions that our code sort of raised. The first thing I want to do is get BQplot working too, for example, but we don't have a good story right now for packaging extra JavaScript code. So external libraries. Right now we can easily include code in the hard-coded version, but it's hard to have extra JavaScript code that's loaded at runtime. But this brings up a whole raft of questions about how to do extensions in JupyterLab, and how to have dynamically loaded extensions, etc. So I'm not sure exactly how the Matplotlib code works, if it's just sending JavaScript over IOPub and then executing from there, in which case we'll have to take a look at how that's implemented. But I think right now, for example, at Interact doesn't work. That's a shorter term goal for me, and bring up actually another discussion that I want to have here. But on the original discussion, so the JupyterLab extension right now is just a private repo that's in my GitHub, because there was some pushback about making it too widely known, too publicly known. Our hope is that we will consolidate the JupyterLab extension plus the JavaScript code sort of in one big huge repo that people can install either with pip-e and then actually develop the code and see the results, or they can just pip install and use the code. Right now what we have instead is several JavaScript packages, npm packages, that all depend on each other and require updates to each other to keep in sync. And then there's a build of those packages that's packaged into this JupyterLab server extension. So that means if you install the server extension, you still can't develop anything. What?
That's the one that I just installed.
That's right. But even installing the server extension, you still can't develop anything, because you have to download the JavaScript packages, modify them, then update the server extension to point to your locally modified JavaScript npm packages. And it's kind of a big pain right now to easily be able to pull down something and start developing it. So what the repo architecture looks like to consolidate all these into an npm package, into a single npm package that also has a bit of Python code to install as a server extension. What that looks like, I think we still need to decide. But comments on the general direction, Fernando, of putting basically everything that's needed for JupyterLab in a single repo that includes the server extension.
Yeah, that I'm completely on board with. The ease of the experience for people developing off of master, I think, is something that we really need to improve on, because otherwise uptake is going to be very slow, right? If there's too many moving parts the way they are right now, only people like us are going to be able to put up with that level, with those many hoops to jump through. So if we consolidate that into a single repo, would that repo be able to, can we hook up the main server so that updates in that repo are automatically shipped to the front end? And the way at least with a Git, if need be, the way right now, things on the main notebook have become reasonably simple by virtue of having the Git hooks that watch and redo the JavaScript build for you. So at this point, keeping up to date with development on the main notebook is not that painful, because you can just git pull, and at most there's a build step, but it's automatically triggered.
Yeah,
Would
what I
that
see,
consolidation give us?
I see a future workflow as being clone the repo, the JupyterLab repo, pip install -e, which installs the server extension, and then enable the extension. So Jupyter server extension enable whatever. Then you launch the server, and then you go in, and inside this repo will be all the JavaScript code. So you modify any JavaScript code you want, and then do a build step. We can have an automatic thing that watches your files and does the automatic build step, and then it'll be live in the notebook server that you've launched. So you might have to refresh or something, but
yeah, for the developer running a build extension step, I think is fine. For people who are following master, that can be loaded by a Git hook, which is what we do. So that if you didn't make those changes yourself, but they come to you by virtue of being having been pushed into upstream, then the build step is done for you on pull. Because I mean, there's a different kind of cognitive load there, right? If you're the one developing, you know that you just changed something. It's okay for you to run a command. It's different if you just pulled. You don't know whether the changes are relevant or not. That can be automated via Git. And I think those two cover.
This is master of the server extension, not master of notebook that we're talking about here. And then the idea of notebook 5.0.
That's how we want it to work in the server extension.
Yeah, so notebook 5.0 would depend on the server extension, but it would be, right now at least, installable in notebook 4.2. So you could use it in notebook 4.2 as well. And that would let people actually just download the package and try it out in 4.2 without having to try to run notebook master.
So then the next question is, okay, so I have two questions. One is, do we want to change the UI in master to remove that button and instead make it simply such that if you install it, we get a little tab, as we have discussed before? Do we still want to do that? The way the IPython clusters tab, so that that tab can also contain, it gives us also an area for information that can be useful.
Yeah, we certainly can. There's no official UI for doing that. Men pointed out that they're basically just willy-nilly changing the /tree HTML file on the client side to add whatever they want. So there's no official UI for adding tabs or anything like that. You can just modify the page however you want. Just do whatever you want to the DOM. We could add another tab. We could just make a try JupyterLab button on the 4.2 notebook just by modifying the page. On the 5 notebook, it's not a big deal to have the button there because the server extension, once it's released and sort of official, will be a required thing in notebook 5. So that means that your button will work because the server extension will be installed. So it's not an issue having the button there without the server extension. So yeah, I think these are details that are pretty easy to take care of once we decide on the direction to go. But I think first is the repo consolidation. That'll make our lives quite a bit easier as developers. And then it'll give an official home to the server extension. Right now, the server extension doesn't have an official home or PyPI package or anything like that. So I guess there is a question about what the directory structure in the consolidated repo looks like. We want this repo to be a massive NPM package that people can install and use. So if people want to use just the notebook or a cell or something like that, they can depend on this JupyterLab package and then pull out whatever files that they want out of the directories. So we want it to have the structure of an NPM repo, but we also want it to have the structure of a PyPI package so that people can clone the repo and pip install it. We can do this by making an overarching repo and have 2 different directories, one for the PyPI package and one for the NPM package. That's similar to how IPyWidgets works now. We can do it by making it have an NPM package structure generically, and then a subdirectory of the NPM package is the PyPI package, and then it just has a setup.py as well. So there's this weird mix of Python and JavaScript. I'm not sure what's the best way to combine an NPM package and a PyPI package in one repo so that it's easy to use as both.
I'm a little concerned that for people who only want to use the front end code that's there, that having the Python package with it will be a serious turnoff.
So,
And
I mean, one way to do it is,
my thought would be just let's have two packages, JupyterJS, JupyterLab, and Jupyter, like two repos, two packages where just the server extension and then just all the JavaScript.
yeah, the disadvantage to that is it seriously complicates the workflow for developers. If everything's in one repo, you can clone the repo, pip install -e, the server extension, and then any changes you make in the JavaScript are automatically reflected. You just npm build and then they're reflected. So if you have two packages, then you have to download both packages, make your changes in the npm package, then update your server extension to point to the npm package that you've made changes in, and then go from there.
That's a nightmare. No, that's just
what I said.
That's what we're dealing with now, and it's too complicated for a drive-by developer.
Well, and part of
that doesn't even begin to touch on things like browser caches and other things that can sometimes get in the way, and you don't know which version of the JavaScript you're running. So, yeah, I'm definitely pro making all that a single repo.
Okay.
So one thing we can do though is make the PyPI package a subdirectory. So call the repo an npm package, and then a subdirectory is the PyPI package, and so
you don't even need to worry about that. You just write your package.json to only include the files that you want to be uploaded to npm, and so it can just completely skip all of the Python stuff in the repo.
Right.
And
so
also,
if people are just installing the npm package, they'll get just the npm stuff. Yeah.
And
that's a good.
And also, I think we want people to be able to pip install from a GitHub URL, and if we hide the Python package in a subdirectory, they can't do that.
Okay, well, so we can do the similar thing for PyPI, right? You can write PyPI so it only includes the built JavaScript, and so the PyPI package is just the Python bits plus the built JavaScript, and then of course if you clone the repo, you get everything.
You get both. Yeah. So if you push the released version of either language package, only includes the code for that one plus whatever's needed of the other one, if any, such as the Python one carrying the built version of JavaScript. It doesn't need to carry the sources because you're installing effectively a binary, right? Versus, but
essentially just carries the built.
Yeah, the clone repo.
Yes, the PyPI package carries the Webpack version, and the npm carries just the npm built package. So what we'll end up with is a repo that at the top level has a setup.py and a package JSON. Is that okay?
Yes. Yep. So the only thing I would say is I would like master and 5.0 of the notebook to have a hard pip and conda requirement on this server extension and load by default. So no enable step is required.
Yeah, I think so too. That's what we.
And I'm assuming from the discussion, the JupyterLab button would still be in master.
Or we could make the JupyterLab button automatically enabled when you enable the server extension. Okay. That way, a button will appear in 4.2 when you install it.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's another fantastic part of this is that we don't have to release 5.0 for all of this to work.
Right. Not yet. We don't depend on anything in 5.0 yet. Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'll probably take a crack at that and try to preserve some of the Git history as well, so that we can preserve the history of commits and owner credit, commit credit.
Yeah, I think it's the most solution because I think the repo explosion has caused too many other problems. And so I'm very happy to consolidate a little bit.
We're mimicking the universe, right? We expanded at this big bang, and now we're contracting back. Well,
forming galaxies.
Physicists will point out that we don't actually know if the universe is contracting or expanding, but
no, and this is
or it is expanding now, but if it will contract eventually.
Yeah, part of what's been so difficult, even as I start to work with the students, is telling them, so I want you to go and work with the notebook plugin, and there's no real way for them to do that in the actual JupyterLab environment.
Right.
Like they have to work with this super stripped down example in JupyterJS Notebook, and it's really hard for them to try the whole thing. And so I'm super +1, huge improvement.
I'll take a crack at that. So
I'm assuming we're going to call the repo just JupyterLab.
I think so. Yeah, if we're putting everything in there, then might as well just call it JupyterLab.
Perfect.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So another completely separate issue is, Brian, I don't know if you got my email. There's basic widget functionality working now.
Yeah.
And so this takes Darian's port of the widgets over to Phosphor, the debootstrapification of the widgets. There's a lot of UI things that still need to be made and things like that. Like Darian's been saying all along, that he took a first initial crack at the UI, but really we need to have a designer look at the UI. And then there's some various things that are sort of weird with more complex examples of widgets that weren't available, I think, in our examples. So it would be good for someone to begin to take a look at how the basic widgets work.
Yeah.
But one of the things that immediately comes up is interact doesn't work, because remember we switched how the widgets are being handled in the new notebook. So before, the old notebook, widgets had their own special magical place that was above the output and below the input. And that meant if you cleared the output, it would not clear the widgets. That meant that interact would work fine, that you would just clear the output and run the function again in order to update the output area when you typed @interact and had a function. So that doesn't work anymore because widgets are now in the output area. So a widget displays itself by sending a particular display data MIME type, and then it's automatically displayed inline in the output. So now clear output will clear the widgets as well. So the way we were addressing that was resurrecting this idea of an output widget. Yep. That lets you capture output messages and display them in a particular div, a particular area for the output area widget. So then your @interact, what it does is it arranges your controls. This is all inside of the output area of a cell. Your @interact will create some controls and create an output widget below those controls, run the function, and capture the output of anything that function does, and put it in this area below the controls. And then anytime you change a control, it's going to re-execute the function, clear this output area, re-execute the function, capture the output messages, and put them back in this little area.
Yep.
So
rather than calling a full clear output on execution.
That's right. It just calls clear output on the output widget. Yeah. And so the idea is this would be fully nestable, that you could have output areas inside of output areas and things like that. And I think the way is pretty clear how to recursively include these things. What's been a bit of a thorn in the side was, how do we actually capture output messages? So John had a really hacky way of rerouting output messages in the old notebook. We had an idea about capturing output messages on the server side, the kernel side. And Dave put a lot of work into trying to get that functionality working so that you could have a context manager that captures output messages on the kernel side. That work is about half done or so, and then we lost Dave to another company. So I was picking that back up because I realized with our widget examples that are now working in the current notebook, that of course @interact doesn't work yet, and that's going to be something that people really want to work. So I was looking at that quite a bit yesterday and this morning, and in conjunction with a lot of the conversations that we had at the last dev meeting, where we talked about kernel nannies and dealing with capturing output, and in conjunction with thinking more about John's hacky solution before, and some conversations with Chris about how the output widget works. I think the better way is, instead of trying to capture output on the server side, is to go ahead and try to make a clean way to reroute messages on the client side. So the big thing here is, if we introduce kernel nannies, then capturing messages on the server side becomes a lot more complicated, because the kernel nanny is now going to be capturing output from the process, and so now the kernel nanny needs to know stuff about how to capture out messages and send them to a specific COM, and I think it gets way too complicated. There's also issues of capturing messages on threads. This is part of the work that Dave was doing, but I mean, he did a lot of work towards this. It's pretty complicated and technical, and it's still not done. There's still a lot of sort of complicated technical things that we'd need to do to capture output on the kernel side. And if we implemented capturing on the output on the kernel side, then every kernel would need to re-implement some way of capturing output and sending it in COM messages, which we expect there to be many more kernels than front ends. So we're pushing a lot of work on everyone. So as opposed to a clean way of doing what John suggested, which is also along the lines of what Chris was hinting at as well, and that is just a message and a way to filter output messages and reroute output messages on the client side. So you have an output widget. It sends a COM message to your JavaScript output component. The JavaScript output component talks to the kernel and says, hey, give me all messages that are destined for this particular message ID, from this particular execution. And you could even add some metadata that says, if the message is tagged with metadata that says it comes from this particular thread, give those to me. And really what it would do is it would just register a filter on the messages with the kernel and says, give me every message and I'll give you back the ones I don't want. And I'll take over processing of the messages that I want. And then it uses the output renderer to render those output messages. So then kernels don't have to pay attention to anything. Everything's on the front end, the client side. And so each client end component would just have to provide a way to filter kernel messages. But we expect there to be only a few clients.
How does this mesh? I don't have all the pieces in my head, but how does this mesh with the idea that we're discussing both for real-time synchronization, for real-time collaboration, and for simplifying the save, the amount of effort from the save operations? How does this mesh with having more of the state captured server side? If all of this filtering is being done client side, the actual state of the document is known to the client. And we've been talking about trying to really have the server that basically the server that is close to the content manager, not the kernel, but the server that is close to the content manager, be the one who has the authoritative view of the document model. I'm a little confused with how these two, what you just said, interacts with that idea.
Right. Yeah. So it's not obvious, I think, how to actually do that. We could adopt something like what Sage does, and that is put the responsibility on the client for arranging this document, and the client is supposed to sync to the server, and then the server takes those updates as updates to the document state and then pushes those back out to everybody else. If the COM message went to everybody, then each person could update, and then if each person had the same process for updating, then they could end up with a synchronized version without syncing through the server. Yeah, I mean, we're already going to have updates from the client sent to the server saying, hey, I changed the document model, update yourself and broadcast these changes.
Yes,
so
obviously there's actions that happen client side that modify the state. So obviously that's
right. So I would consider this as one of those, just an action that comes client side and modifies the document. So it does put a little kink in the works that the server doesn't know that this particular output message is not going to be sent into the cell output, it's going to be sent into this output widget output.
Yes. I think it's not clear, but I don't think it makes it any worse, Fernando.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
And I think it's certainly a lot less complicated than trying to deal with capturing output cleanly on the kernel side.
So
definitely pushing that responsibility to the kernels sounds like a really bad idea. We want the kernel behavior to be basically a set of responses to protocol messages, and that's it, without much more logic than that. I mean, implementing a kernel should be implementing an event handling loop for these classes of events, plus this particular kind of thing, which is execute code, and then format and represent the output of that in our manners, and that's it. That really should be the idea of a kernel. If we start adding delicate logic about what to do with every type of output, it's going to be a disaster for kernel implementations.
Well, I mean, this wouldn't be something that, even if we implemented this server-side output capturing, I mean, it would be a complication, but it's only required for if you want to support the output widget. So it's not something that's, you know, basic in the kernel message architecture. It's if you want to support the output widget, then you have to implement capturing. Unfortunately, implementing capturing on the kernel side is pretty complicated in Python and probably in other kernels as well, because you have C layer stuff that's printing and you know, the reasons why we wanted a kernel nanny.
Am I getting echoed bad? Questions on implementation. So right now we route output based on the UUID of the cell. And so what I'm imagining here,
yeah, in the current Jupyter.js services, we route based on the message ID in the parent header.
Yeah, yes, so, but that's it ends up being the cell ID, because the cell is what that message ID gets set when the code is run by a particular cell. But yes, and so I'm imagining that with this, there's going to, in addition to that, be some sort of ID. It's really probably the COM ID of that output area. And we would then need to send back that in metadata somehow. So the kernel still has to do something.
No, I don't see any of that happening. I see what I see happening is the output widget sends a COM message to the output widget JavaScript client-side component. Then the output widget client-side component has a handle on the kernel, and it asks the kernel to install a message filter for this particular message ID, say, or just install a filter, and I will filter for this particular message ID, and any messages that come back with a parent header message ID that matches what I'm supposed to capture, I take over and return null. And any message that, you know, doesn't fit that, then I just return back to you, and we just treat it as a message filter that's applied before the kernel routing happens.
So basically, this metadata gets transferred not with the output messages themselves, but through the separate COM channel for that output area.
Yeah, and the output area knows what to filter for. That's right.
Okay.
And we can have, I mean, there were some complications with this. There are complications that we have already with the message filtering. So for example, if you have an execution request that kicks off 2 threads, the output from those 2 threads is intermixed incomprehensibly when it's sent to the client. The client has no idea which thread was producing which particular output. This is a complication if you're trying to implement a context handler in one thread. Say send the output to the thread to this one particular place, but in the other thread it's simultaneously printing things. Now all of a sudden, because the output filtering is temporal instead of logical, then every output is being sent while this particular filter is handled. So to get away around that, for example, you could say when you spawn a new thread, you take your current session header information and you set some default metadata, and that will be sent out with every display data message. And this header data, this metadata, would say what thread execution context you're in. So you could send metadata with every output message saying, I'm in thread 5 or thread 6 or thread this particular UUID. And so it's the thread's responsibility when it spins up is to set this output message metadata. And then your output area could say, I want you to filter on things that have this particular message ID and this particular thread metadata. And then it lets you have a finer grain filtering on a thread execution context instead of just anything in response to a particular message. And actually, that's probably not a bad idea anyway to set, to just make a convention that if you start a new thread that you want to logically separate from output from other threads, to set some metadata about the thread that this metadata is, that this output's coming from, and then then we could just make a generic feature in the notebook that says anytime I get a message that has a particular thread metadata, then when I render it, I precede it with the thread ID or something like that. So now you see all of your outputs being displayed, but each output is tagged with the thread it came from, or you could group them together, etc. Another nice thing about having this functionality for routing kernel messages output is it makes it much easier to, for example, support sending output to a sidecar in a notebook. So you can have a notebook that just has input cells and sidecars. So this is like the new MATLAB notebook. Input cells, and then the outputs are specific sidecars. It makes it easy to implement this as an extension instead of something that's supported in the notebook. You have an extension that just takes over any metadata, listens for execution requests, and as soon as there's an execution request, then it installs a filter that will grab any of the output that comes and renders it somewhere else on the page.
Yeah, I've thought that we're going to need something like output filters.
So I think
Chris?
go ahead, Chris.
Or Chris,
I was just going to say, Chris. Did he leave or just video off?
I still have him on the participant list.
I just wanted to know what his thoughts were, because he has usually good things, interesting things to say about architecture decisions.
It would actually also be oh, Chris, go ahead.
So, Chris, I was just curious what your thoughts were.
No, I'm sorry, my net connection locked up, and so I was out for a little bit. So what's the point that you're asking me?
On everything here about how output widgets will work and filtering messages on the client side.
It's hard for me to give a concrete answer to that without, at least involving my mind in it for like a solid 20, 30 minutes.
Okay, thanks. When you involved your mind in it before for about 20 minutes, this was one of the suggestions you had, is maybe we should do it on the client side instead of the server side.
Yeah, I think there's use cases for both. Certainly the use case, the most compelling use case for the one on the client side is the ability to allow extensions to do this kind of thing, and like build things that we haven't thought of without requiring changes to the server. And that's, I think, a compelling enough reason on its own to support message filtering on the client side. Then there's also going to be cases on message filtering on the server side, like what the stuff that Dave was working on, simply because like mechanically we need to be able to do that, and we just need a hook into the actual message generation and event queue processing on the server side. So again, I think there's use cases for both.
I wanted to. Do you think we're done with this topic, Jason?
One thing. So two things actually. One is that I think it would be a good idea to run this by min as well. I mean, the person who really kind of did all the internal low-level work on the messaging architecture and the protocol at the 0MQ level was really originally min, and he's very good at reasoning about these things. So I think it would be a good idea to run this plan by min. And second, I think we'd want to present this in terms of a generic kind of concept of channels for. I mean, this sounds very similar to what 0MQ has for topic filtering in pub/sub channels, and so I wonder to what extent we can at least reuse and describe those concepts to explain how this is put together, so that implementers have a pattern to follow. Because I remember when I started using 0MQ, that mode of describing the communication pattern for topic filtering was very, very clean and the APIs for implementing filters were also very clean. So to the extent that we can follow that model, since we are using 0MQ, I think it would be a useful thing to do.
Okay, I'll when I ping Men about him, I'll ask him about that too, because he's probably the project expert on that sort of thing too.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those were the two things that I had. Go ahead, Brian.
So a couple other related things. So my students are starting in the next week. Basically, they're finishing up finals, and for one of the teams, the first project I've given them is to do basically a design review and audit of the notebook plugin in JupyterLab compared to the notebook plugin in the regular notebook. And basically, I've told them, open up both and open up the Chrome Dev Tools and go and make sure the styling is the same. And part of it is I want them to get to know the DOM structure and the styling of the notebook. I did warn them there's probably some styles that we're not going to copy directly over, but there's a lot that we should. And I guess the way I describe it is if we don't copy the style over from the classic notebook, that should be a deliberate decision, not just an accident. But
you're not considering the DOM structure to be needing to be the same between the two, right? Just the visual appearance.
Yes, okay. But I mean, there's a lot in common about the DOM structure. But yes, absolutely, the DOM structure does not have to be invariant.
I mean, another sub-project of that, but it's cleanly separated, is the widget look and feel. So. Yeah. So that's a project you give just a single person separate from this.
Yeah. So my first question is for you, Jason. I told them right now, go fork and clone Jupyter.js Notebook and start to submit pull requests there. They're probably going to start to do that in earnest next Monday, not this coming Monday, but basically a week from now. Is that? I'm a little worried that they're going to start working there and make your life difficult in the repo consolidation. How should we plan that?
I hope to be done with the repo consolidation by a week from now. Hopefully before then, but we'll see how packaging works. That always seems to take longer than you plan.
Okay.
So I'll probably put the output widget work on hold and work on the repo consolidation, since that seems like a blocking point for people to work on. As long as, Darian, I know you're finishing up some things. Would it bother you if I started consolidating repos, or would that put a major kink in what you're doing?
Actually, no, I'd be fine. The thing that I want next is actually a thing Steve thinks he should probably work on. So he'll be pretty closely involved with what you're doing anyway, so it won't be an issue. Because the help functionality we were talking about, that sort of thing, that's actually the output area widget and not inside console. And since he's so familiar with that code, we were going to look at it together so that I could learn it from him doing that, because he says it's a really quick change actually. So I just want to see how that works. So no, it won't get in my way.
Okay. And I think this might be a good time to do it. Steve, I think, is out for a few days, so if we can get it done before he gets back, then it won't impact work that he has to do either.
Okay, I will warn the students that this is going to happen, and I may have them start to keep track of the changes that will be needed, but don't submit pull requests until the transition happens. But that's fine. As long as we know it's happening soon, that's easy to account for. But then another thing I have talked to Sylvan about is very soon to have one of the student groups that has both devs and designers do a design review of the widgets. And it applies both to the last stable release of widgets, where we actually released with a lot of design and usability problems, but also the new stuff in JupyterLab. And I think having a combined team of 4 students who have both skill sets, they could go through every widget we offer in both Classic Notebook and in JupyterLab and do the coding and the design work needed to bring it all up to speed.
That sounds fantastic. That sounds really great. And I assume you'll be sort of mentoring them. I mean, you'll be around them and helping them and stuff like that too. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Another thing is all of these students are going to be at SciPy. Fernando, you have...
Go ahead. I'll ask later.
And I had previously talked to Chris about possibly doing a training time on JupyterLab at SciPy. And I would love to see that happen. I don't know, Chris, if you're still open or if Steven looks like he's going to be there. If he's not, we could fund him traveling out to SciPy for that.
Both Steve and Darian will be here for SciPy.
Okay. Why don't we, the best day that I can think of would be the Sunday of the sprints. It's sort of, by that point, most of the main conference stuff is winding down. Is that a day that you think is possible, Chris, or is there another day?
Yeah, I mean, superficially, I think that sounds fine. Let's we can rope everybody in together in a conversation and discuss that on a non-recorded channel.
Okay, great.
One thing that I would want, if that I'm not going to be there unfortunately, but if that does happen, if the logistics works out to have that happen, is to make it not just for the students but for everyone in at least everyone in the core team, and also make it possible if other people want to participate, with the understanding that it's basically learning about the cutting edge development part of the project. But if one of the things we're trying to do is lower the barrier to contributions and bringing more of the community, this would be a prime opportunity to tell people. This is not about using anything. This is about if you want to develop with what's coming next on the system. But definitely for anyone from the core team who's going to be there, this would be very, very useful. And it'll be a great reality check on how easy it has become to build and develop with the system.
Yeah, I think it's too early to open it up beyond the core team unless there's really unique people that are willing to become sort of part of the core team on it. But I completely agree. We want to.
That's what I mean. My point is we make it very clear what it is, right? It's basically, this isn't to learn about Jupyter. This is basically, you say, this is very raw alpha leading edge development code, not well documented, therefore we're going to do a training session for the people who are building with it. But there are out there in the community people like that, and if we're not inclusive, we're never going to get them. I mean, if we keep doing things that appear not to be inclusive, we will never get other people to participate. It's just the way it is. So we have to be proactive in being in trying to, now obviously you caveat that so that people don't come with a false expectation. But we have to actually be proactive. Otherwise, we're never going to close this gap ever.
Yeah,
I completely agree, Fernando.
And so I really, really want you, since I'm not going to, I mean, normally I do these things, I'm not going to be there. So I really urge you guys to please pay attention to this.
Okay. Are you, yeah, Jason, you're there, right?
Yeah, I'll be there till Saturday morning. And
okay,
then
so
I'll leave Saturday after.
So we may want to try to schedule it then at a time where you're around.
I'll also be there. I haven't got my flights yet, but I could be there as early as Monday afternoon. And I'm not planning on going to the tutorials Monday and Tuesday. I was planning on hacking with somebody somewhere.
Yeah.
So we could do like Tuesday as well, and that would give us a few days of lead time for any. If we did a training something on Tuesday, then that would give people Wednesday and Thursday to like do things at night or whatever, and come with questions on Saturday.
Yeah. Okay. Let's follow up on email about scheduling that. And then, yeah.
A quick question from the earlier conversation that just carried on too quickly. When the consolidated repo, if we name it lab, is that the repo that eventually is going to carry the main server? I mean, I want us to think about the path forward of what we're going to do, because at some point we're going to want people not to type at the command line Jupyter Notebook, right? They should be typing JupyterLab, and that will be the only entry point. So is this really the repo that should be named lab, or not?
I think it should be named lab. I think we should really JupyterLab. I think we should have a real separation between the server, the notebook server, and which maybe we'll call lab server at some point, and the front end. And so JupyterLab is a front end. It's not a back end at this point. And so it'll be a requirement of the back end with 5.0. So with Notebook 5.0, the JupyterLab front end extension will be a requirement. Eventually, it will probably, the server will grow some things needed for JupyterLab when we have settings or something else. But I think, yeah, JupyterLab we should think of as a front end thing that has a minimal server extension packaging so that you can install it easily into the back end.
And I think the next logical step is to make the classic notebook a server extension as well.
Yep, exactly. So 6.0 is giving an appendectomy to the existing notebook and making it a server extension that is required in 5.0 and optional in 6.0.
Yeah, that type of transition.
Okay.
But Fernando, we can, like, eventually starting that main notebook server, which is in Jupyter/notebook, we may change what the command line is. We may alias it so that Jupyter space lab works.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking that
lab would pull up the /lab URL, which
we want to plan these names now to what the long. It's one way of introducing these concepts to the community is what these key repos are organized as represents where the project is headed in terms of how these things are affected. But I think that the plan of making them both extensions and then leaving a lab server, whatever core server-side repo in the long run, which is basically what Notebook is today, that's a sensible thing. But I'm fine with that.
But for that reason, I don't think we should call it JupyterJS Lab.
I agree.
We should call it Jupyter Lab and consolidate around that name. Okay, so
it's just one word, no underscores.
Yeah, one word, no underscores. I already have the PyPI name reserved from a moment ago, and we'll reserve. I think I have the npm name as well, just reserved. So we'll just go ahead and use those names. It's past 1 o'clock and my battery is at 12% and dropping like a rock. Is there anything else that we should talk about?
So at some point I want to talk about the design of tab completion tooltip stuff, but we can do that next week.
Or feel free to ping Darian. Yeah. I mean, Darian's the one who's really good in this.
Okay.
You can, you can post issues. We could talk about it in person or whatever. But I am really curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Okay, we'll follow up on offline or online.
And real quick, for Darian, just two ideas while I have you here. A couple of things that I noticed on the console. First of all, scrolling of output at the bottom. If you do like for I in range 10, print I, and at the bottom it doesn't scroll, so you're going to want to manage scrolling. And the other one that is very useful and is to get in the notebook the behavior that we have today with %Qt console that opens a Qt console attached to the current kernel of a notebook. So that's something that we'll want to be able to have is to say, give me a console attached to this notebook, because then consoles effectively become scratch pads, which is what Min's little sidecar extension does. They become scratch pads. So making it easy not just to open a fresh console, but a console attached to any given kernel, and as many as you want, because then they become basically.
We actually support that already. So built in from day one was the ability to swap kernels. So it already supports it. It just needs to be hooked up to some mechanism that's keeping track. So right now, if you in JupyterLab, you could presumably add a bunch of commands that know about different kernels and hook them up, and it'll be able to launch consoles as of right now. And within an existing console, you could even have the ability to have it switch its kernel. So yeah, that's there.
Yeah, I think at least for that, I think the right model would be there's a command in the notebook plugin that says launch a console for the current notebook.
Yeah, definitely, and that would go in its menu or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then why don't we call the meeting there?
Jason's battery is gonna die. So.
All right.
All right. Thanks everybody.